She always sat by the window on the third floor. Always in the same white dress. Always with an empty gaze. But when I asked the owner of the house who she was, he replied, "No one lives in that room. I work as a journalist specializing in mysterious phenomena. Most of the time, these are cheap tales that are easily debunked. But this story is different." I arrived in a small town in Virginia on a routine assignment. I needed to write a piece about the old Riverside Hotel, which was scheduled for demolition. The hotel was built in 1935, nearly abandoned, but still accepting guests. The drive into town had been pleasant enough, rolling hills flanking a two-lane highway that wound through dense forests before opening up to reveal Millfield, population 2,723 according to the weathered welcome sign. Main Street was exactly what you'd expect, a strip of family-owned businesses, their brick facades faded by decades of sun and rain. The Riverside Hotel stood at the far end, a four-story relic overlooking the sluggish Shenandoah River. From the outside, the hotel retained echoes of its former grandeur. Art Deco flourishes adorned the entryway, and ornate iron balconies jutted from each floor. But the paint was peeling, and several windows were boarded up. The demolition notice posted at the entrance gave the building 6 more weeks of life. Inside, the lobby smelled of dust and forgotten cigarettes. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, its once brilliant facets now dulled by a thick layer of grime. Beneath my feet, the marble floor was cracked in places, with sections covered by threadbare carpets in a futile attempt at renovation. "Can I help you?" The voice came from behind an antique reception desk, where an elderly man peered at me through thick glasses. His name tag read Henry. "Michael Crawford," I said, extending my hand. "From Eastern Standard Magazine. I called earlier about the article." Recognition flickered in his rheumy eyes. "Ah, yes. The piece about the old girl's final days." He patted the wooden counter affectionately. "Shame they're tearing her down. But I suppose everything has its time." I signed the guest registry, one of only 3 names that week, and took the key he offered. "Room 212, second floor." "Elevator's broken," Henry said apologetically. "Has been for years. Stairs are to your right." The staircase spiraled upward, its wrought iron railings cool beneath my palm. On the second floor, the hallway stretched in both directions, the wallpaper a faded floral pattern interrupted by water stains. My room was near the end, overlooking the parking lot. It was sparse but clean, a double bed with a sagging mattress, a desk with a lamp, and a bathroom that had been updated sometime in the late 1980s. I unpacked my laptop and recorder, then decided to explore the hotel while daylight remained. I wandered the empty corridors, noting details from my article, the peeling paint, the framed photographs of the hotel in its heyday, the ballroom with its dusty chandeliers. Most of the guest rooms were locked, but occasionally I'd find one open, frozen in time with mid-century furniture and yellowing curtains. It was while returning to my room for the evening that I noticed her for the first time. A woman in a white dress sat by the window on the 3rd floor. Her hands were folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. Something about her stillness caught my attention. She didn't move, didn't seem to blink, just stared out at the darkening sky. Curious, I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway was similar to mine below, but quieter somehow, as if the air itself was heavier. I walked down to where I calculated her room would be, 312, according to the tarnished brass numbers on the door. I hesitated, then knocked softly. No response. I knocked again, louder this time. The sound echoed down the empty corridor, but still no answer came. After a moment's hesitation, I tried the handle. To my surprise, it turned easily. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, untouched. A thin layer of dust covered the dresser and nightstand. The window was closed, the curtains drawn back, but there was no sign anyone had been there. Confused, I went back downstairs to the lobby where Henry was still at the desk, now reading a paperback with a cracked spine. "Excuse me," I said. "Who's staying in room 312? Henry looked up, his expression odd. "No one. That room isn't rented out." "But I just saw a woman there," I insisted. "Sitting by the window in a white dress." Something flickered across Henry's weathered face, recognition, perhaps, or concern. But it vanished quickly, replaced by a practiced smile. "You must be mistaken," he said, returning to his book. "Perhaps it was a reflection in the glass. These old windows play tricks sometimes, especially at dusk." I wanted to press further, but his dismissal was clear. I thanked him and headed back to my room, unsettled. That night, I struggled to sleep. The hotel creaked and settled around me, its ancient pipes clanking in the walls. Outside my window, the moon cast silver light across the parking lot, creating long shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. I kept thinking about the woman in white. Had she been a reflection, as Henry suggested? But I'd seen her so clearly, her pale face, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the way her white dress contrasted with the dark window behind her. Around 3 in the morning, I was startled awake by footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps that paused outside my door. I held my breath, watching the thin strip of light beneath the door for a shadow. Nothing appeared, but the floorboards creaked as if bearing weight. After what felt like minutes, the footsteps continued down the hall, fading into silence. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. Morning brought clarity and embarrassment. Ghost stories were my stock in trade, but I'd never considered myself susceptible to them. The woman must have been a guest Henry wasn't aware of, or perhaps someone from the demolition company inspecting the building. The footsteps were likely another guest returning late. After a quick shower and coffee from the ancient percolator in the lobby, I set out to photograph the hotel for my article. The day was overcast, lending a melancholy air to the proceedings. I captured the exterior from various angles, documenting the architectural details that would soon be lost forever. Inside, I photographed the lobby, the ballroom, and several of the common areas. I was careful to frame my shots to highlight both the decay and the lingering elegance of the place. My editor had specifically requested this juxtaposition, beauty fading into memory, the inevitable march of progress. It was while reviewing these images on my camera's display that I noticed something strange. In one of the exterior shots, a figure was visible in a third-floor window. Room 312. I zoomed in, my pulse quickening. It was her, the woman in white. But this time, she was looking directly at the camera. Directly at me. Her face was clearer now, young, perhaps late 20s, with dark hair framing pale features. Her expression was solemn, her eyes intensely focused. I scrolled through my other photos. She appeared in 3 more, always in the same window, always watching me. In the last image, her hand was pressed against the glass, as if reaching out. I hurried back to find Henry. The lobby was empty, but I could hear movement in the small office behind the desk. I called out, and after a moment, he emerged, looking annoyed at the interruption. "I need to ask you something," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About room 312. Who used to stay there? Before it was closed?" Henry's annoyance melted into something more complex, resignation, perhaps, or weariness. He studied me for a long moment, then sighed deeply. "You've seen her, haven't you?" he asked quietly. "The lady in white." When I nodded, he motioned for me to follow him into the office. The small room was cluttered with decades of paperwork, filing cabinets with drawers hanging open, and shelves lined with ledgers dating back to the hotel's opening. Henry moved slowly to a battered desk and opened the bottom drawer. After rummaging through its contents, he withdrew a yellowed newspaper clipping, preserved in a plastic sleeve. "This is from 1952, he said, handing it to me carefully. "It happened before my time, but every manager here knows the story. The headline read, "Local woman jumps to death at Riverside." Beneath it was a grainy photograph of a young woman with dark hair. The caption identified her as Mary Langley, 27. The article was brief. Tragedy struck at the Riverside Hotel yesterday when Mary Langley, 27, jumped from her third-floor window. Langley, a local schoolteacher, had been staying at the hotel for 2 weeks following a nervous breakdown, according to sources. Her body was discovered in the courtyard by a hotel employee. Police have ruled the death a suicide. She's still here?" I asked, looking up from the article. Henry took the clipping back, handling it with reverence. "I don't know what to believe," he said, his voice low. "I've never seen her myself. But over the years, many guests have. Always the same description: young woman, white dress, sitting by the window in 312. He carefully returned the article to its drawer. "Some say they've heard crying from that room, though it's been locked since before I started working here. Why wasn't I told about this when I mentioned her last night?" I pressed. Henry's mouth tightened. "Do you know what happens when word gets out that your hotel is haunted? Either you become a carnival attraction for ghost hunters and teenagers looking for thrills, or people avoid you completely. Neither is good for business." He closed the drawer with finality. "Besides, most folks who see her only mention it after they've checked out. By then, it's just another story." I thought about my article. This was exactly the kind of angle my editor would love: the haunted hotel scheduled for demolition, the persistent ghost about to lose her home. But something about Mary Langley's story made me hesitate to exploit it. "Is there anyone in town who might have known her?" I asked. "Family members, colleagues, friends?" Henry scratched his chin thoughtfully. "After 70 years? Doubtful. But..." He paused. "There's Margaret Winters at the library. She's in her 90s now, but she's lived here all her life. If anyone would remember, it'd be her." I thanked him and left. The newspaper clipping's image burned into my memory. Outside, the day had grown colder, a light drizzle misting the air. The town library was a small brick building 3 blocks from the hotel, nestled between a hardware store and a cafe. Inside, the warmth and smell of books enveloped me. A middle-aged woman at the front desk directed me to Margaret Winters, who sat in a back corner surrounded by stacks of local history materials. Margaret was tiny, her frame shrunken by age, but her blue eyes were sharp and alert. When I mentioned the Riverside Hotel, those eyes narrowed with interest. "You're writing about the old hotel?" she asked, her voice surprisingly strong. "About time someone documented it properly before they tear it down." "Actually," I said, taking a seat across from her, "I'm interested in something specific." "Someone, rather. A woman named Mary Langley who died there in 1952. Margaret went very still. "Mary," she repeated softly. "Now there's a name I haven't heard spoken aloud in years." She closed the book she'd been cataloging. "What exactly do you want to know about her?" I explained about seeing the woman in room 312, about the newspaper article, careful to present it as an interesting local legend rather than admitting I believed in ghosts. Margaret listened without interruption, her weathered hands folded on the table. When I finished, she was quiet for so long I thought she might not respond. "I knew Mary," she finally said. "We taught together at the elementary school. She was luminous. The kind of person who lights up a room just by entering it. The children adored her." Her gaze drifted to the rain-spattered window. "What happened to her was a tragedy, but it wasn't as simple as that article made it sound." "What do you mean?" Margaret sighed. "The official story was that Mary had a nervous breakdown and committed suicide. But those of us who knew her never believed that. Mary wasn't depressed or unstable. Quite the opposite, she was engaged to be married that summer to Robert Caldwell, a local doctor. They were planning to build a house by the river. So what happened? 2 weeks before she died, Mary began acting strangely. She told me she'd seen something at the hotel, something that frightened her. She wouldn't say what, exactly, just that she couldn't stay in her apartment anymore. That's why she moved to the riverside temporarily. Did she say anything else? I pressed, leaning forward. Margaret's eyes clouded with memory. The last time I saw her was the day before she died. She came to the library, right here, in fact, and asked for old newspapers. Articles about the hotel from when it was built. She seemed urgent. When I asked what she was looking for, she just said, the truth about what's hidden there. The next morning, she was dead. A chill ran through me despite the library's warmth. Do you think she was murdered? Margaret's gaze sharpened. I don't know what happened. The police investigation was cursory at best. Robert was devastated. He left town shortly after and never returned. The hotel management was quick to have everything cleared away and the room cleaned. By the time anyone started asking questions, there was nothing left to find. And no one looked into it further. It was 1952, Margaret said simply. A woman with nerves jumps from a window, regrettable but not suspicious enough to warrant extensive investigation. Especially when powerful local interests wanted the matter closed quickly. Powerful interests. Margaret nodded slowly. The riverside was owned by the Harrington family back then. They practically ran this town, owned the bank, the newspaper, half the businesses on Main Street. If they wanted something hushed up, it stayed hushed. I made notes as she spoke, my journalist's instincts fully engaged now. Are any of the Harringtons still around? The last one died years ago. Their mansion on the hill is a bed and breakfast now. She paused, studying me. You're not just writing a puff piece about the hotel's history, are you? I'm not sure what I'm writing anymore, I admitted. Margaret smiled, a knowing glint in her eye. You've seen her, haven't you? Not just in photographs. You've seen Mary. I hesitated, then nodded. Then perhaps you're the one she's been waiting for, Margaret said cryptically. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather-bound book. This was Mary's diary. Her fiancé gave it to me before he left town, said he couldn't bear to read it. I've kept it all these years, waiting for, well, I'm not sure what. She pushed it across the table. Maybe you'll find answers in here that I couldn't. I accepted the diary with reverence, feeling the weight of its history. Thank you. I'll take good care of it. See that you do, she said firmly. And Michael? Be careful. Whatever Mary discovered at that hotel, it was dangerous enough to silence her permanently. That night, I decided to stay in the corridor of the third floor. At 2:37, the door to 312 slowly opened. I held my breath and stepped closer. On the floor lay an old photograph. A woman in a white dress. And behind me came a whisper. You found me. I turned around, but the corridor was empty. The next morning, I checked out. But as I was getting into my car, I couldn't resist looking up at the window on the third floor. She was standing there. And she was smiling. Was Mary Langley a real ghost, or was someone maintaining this legend?